There was a philosopher that made a lot of sense from the old times. I can't remember who it was, but he said, "The only thing I know is I know nothing." And this world is extremely strange. Especially when I see people, saying, "Well, I have rights," and they're using them way out of context. Like, a cop will tell them, like, "No, you're not. That is not your right." Like, and it's like it's in the same category that the person's thinking of, but what they're talking about precisely does not fall under that context. So it's like they think everything falls under like a simplified category, and it's not meant to be that way. That's why every state has its own laws. Is so if you go from one place to another, you have to relearn all those laws. I mean, not even every state has like the felony system, the misdemeanor system. They don't all work the same way. So it's like you'll move to another state and like, oh yeah, this is my right, and you know where you live at, right? And it's like these people are trying to simplify everything, and I see it every day with like how capitalism affects people. Where I see people would have some of their greatest ideas not under pressure, not copycatting, not getting desperate because philosophers have said, I think a philosopher said, everything's been said before. It's just something I hear a lot, always have, and a lot of sayings just like that that are meant to tell you you're not going to find out anything new that hasn't been found out before. But the thing is, you know, 8 years ago, I think it was 8 years ago, I started doing this, or 7 years ago, and I started making memes, and everybody thought I was a psycho. They're like, "Oh man, this guy's out of his gourd," and yeah, I was, and I was pissed, and I was pissed that everybody thought that I would never be able to create anything. That I was thrown in a ditch and left for dead. And so many of us feel like that, and it's like with connection, it's like even when you get in trouble, all these people are going to be there to support you. But if you're spoiled, you're going to look past that and, you know, whine to these people that are trying to help you. You're going to say, uh, I got a bunch of fines. And it's like, well, that's the worst you got. Like, that's not bad. But the person's like, oh, but it's still a fine. Like, I got to pay all this money. And, it's like, it's not that bad. But trying to explain to these people when they're in their mindset and their reality distorts, they're not trying to understand. They're trying. They want it to just disappear. And that's the problem with the human mind is a lot of times when we just want it to disappear. When you're talking to a cop and you're like, well, I don't even know what I'm getting charged with yet. Let's just hope it's not this, this, and this. And then they say, well, you're getting charged with this and this and this, and it's way less than you thought. And it's like, oh yeah, yeah, that's not bad. But it's like when they say exactly what you were thinking it was going to be, it's like, like you just had a flashbang go off in your head, and it's like, there it is. That was the moment I was dreading. And a lot of times that's what happens to people is, the sense of fairness. They'll see one person, get something and they think everybody deserves it. And it's like, well, maybe these people are connected in a way that nobody else sees. Maybe they're friends. It could be two people on a job and their career is professional, but outside of work, they hang out, and it's like, okay, so you can't look at it as fairness because you don't know that person's relationship with this other person. And that's when people start rumors and that it's their way of filling in the gaps they don't know because they have a need for that. I mean, look at science, look at history. We have a need to know, right? So even in people are about pattern recognition, so they'll say, okay, well, these cues meet up with with this situation, so we assume that this is what's happening. Now, a person that doesn't have connection, this is where it gets very, very complicated. When a person feels like they're the only one that is like them, then everything they do is going to feel odd to them. And they're going to try to keep space from people so those people don't see this person for what they are and what they do. Because then they'll be vulnerable. Maybe this person's been staged before. And they were embarrassed about something huge, and so they expect that to happen again. And so when you think everything is odd about you, you're not going to want everybody to know. But the thing is, when you learn to accept it for what it is, other people learn to take what you're not showing off, but what you're proving that you're comfortable with. And then other people become comfortable with that. And that's what I call programming, because, we watch each other, we see what each other does. And as you're around people, you will transform into something new. You'll gain habits you didn't have before, routines you didn't have before. And sometimes it's subconscious. It's like your brain just says, well, this looks more convenient, looks more fun, looks more something. So then you'll end up taking it on for yourself. So when you isolate, it's like you don't have that connection to the point where if something happens to you, if you go out into the wilderness, into the freaking social safari, you, you just you feel so alone. It's like I can get in trouble for literally anything in this world, and I'm not gonna have anybody that's gonna care. It's like being in prison without nobody that cares. I know a lot of people, but those people had no problem having a conversation because they knew that they wouldn't have anybody. So they appreciated the conversations they had because they didn't want to live the rest of their life in a dark place in a dark mood. It's already dark enough. Pretty much every lifer I've ever met, they weren't what you'd think they would be. They learned to appreciate what they had, reminisce what they've had, and they appreciate the good conversations. Like you'll see tables of just old people talking, and it's like that's all they're gonna ever have, you know. And there is no such thing as odd. The only odd thing is if you go in somebody's cell that isn't yours and put the sheet up, everybody's gonna know it. But in there, other than that, nothing's odd unless you talk to the Aryans. The Aryans are pretty, yeah, they're pretty, they get pissy about just about everything. To them, everything is odd. But those guys are nuts, man. I'm telling you. Yeah, I was cellies with one, and I go up to my cell. I'm going to get a shower and find out my cell's been robbed. And even my cellie stuff. And the only person I seen was the guy next to my cell. He's like this guy that's like 6'6", and I'm 5'8", and so like this guy's not just tall, but he was built. He was Aryan. And I went down. I said to my buddy, I said, "Man, somebody robbed my cell." And I said, "The only person I seen was the guy in the cell next to me, and everybody else was locked in." And he says, "Well, let's go have a talk to this guy. He's on the phone." My buddy walks up, and he's even shorter than I am. He walks up to this guy. He says, "Yo, when you're off the phone, I want to talk to you over by the showers." So he comes over. We're standing over there. I was like, "Dude, what are you doing?" He's like, "No, just don't worry about it. Just let me take care of it." I said, "Dude, I don't even know if it's him." And he says, dude, I got this. He says, we're just going to ask him. And I said, all right. And guy comes over. He says, man, I was on the phone with my daughter. What the hell you want? My buddy says, man, why you robbing people's cells? Blah, 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 blah. He says, man, who the hell said that? Guy, buddy points at me. All of a sudden, time freezes. My nose starts tickling. I didn't see him move. I said, did he just hit me? And all of a sudden, he starts picking his arm up again. I was like, shit. My adrenaline kicked in so hard, time froze, and I didn't even know he hit me. But he came up to me later that day, and he says, he shakes my hand. He says, man, I ain't never seen anybody take a hit like that. Strange world.